So after making the video talking about how the commentary, reviews, and feedback has honestly been a lot of negativity in general, while also having the reverse happen, which is there's a ton of absolute mega fans of the game. It's really split. I wanted to go back and look at the more recent popular ARPG releases, being Diablo 3 and Path of Exile, looking at their releases, their beta reviews, and kind of comparing. And as the title of this video says, I want to tell you why Diablo 4 could be, and in my opinion will be, the best ARPG released. So the first thing I want to dive into is the launch of Path of Exile and Diablo 3. I think a lot of people have this, honeymoon type permanent look over their eyes because of where Path of Exile and Diablo 3 are today. Now, some people hate Diablo 3 and love it, and some people hate Path of Exile and love it. But the point is that both these games have come a long way from where they were before. And as per usual, every beta and every release of the game is going to have massive negativity and massive positivity on both sides almost always. There's very rarely, unless you have something like Diablo Immortal, which is going to be pure negativity, right? So if we look back at Path of Exile's full release, October 23rd, 2013, by the way, as we're going through all these reviews and such, this was like before the era of mass media where we have like constant reviews, constant everything. So finding some of these reviews is a little tricky, as well as finding all the kind of nuances of the game. But to go through some of these things, I want to mention a few things that a lot of people seem to forget. First off, Diablo 4's endgame seems to have a lot to offer. I can't talk about it much because we don't know a whole lot, but at least what they've said, it seems like to offer quite a bit. In terms of Path of Exile, if we look at the actual release of the game, they had 3 acts. That's it. 6 new world areas with the release of the game from the beta, as well as Dominus being the final boss, 7 the character class Scion, and a few other things, right? Now, it's important to know that Path of Exile was a free-to-play game, and that is a consideration, although I personally found that Path of Exile was not fun to play unless you spent money on the things that, kind of gave you that quality of life, so keep that in mind. But as we go further, there are 2 specific things that I want to talk about. First off, I guess another one as well is that they actually added the Ascendancy classes in 2016. They added the Act 5 through 10 in 2017, okay, with a bunch of new bosses and new skill gems, etc. And then even later on, in 2021, the Echoes of the Atlas expansion reworked the endgame by introducing 11 new endgame map areas and the endgame pinnacle boss, the Maven, okay? They reworked some of the Ascendant character classes. So all these different updates, the point of it is that a lot of the endgame, a lot of the content that we're used to now didn't exist on launch of the game. And so when people go into these games and they say, oh, well, this is just trash, this is the trash game, it's gonna be trash. And for people that are saying, oh, it's literally the best game ever, etc., I think people just need to take a second, take a look back at what the game really is, okay? Path of Exile was by no means a bad game on launch. In fact, one of the biggest things that it had to offer was the fact that it had a very, very in-depth and very interesting skill tree. And that was in the game back in beta. But the endgame content, the mapping areas, the bosses, the unique bosses, the specific advancement classes, and all these different things, they didn't exist, okay? And that's what we could expect to see in Diablo 4, which is that we're gonna get updates, okay? And the same thing applies to Diablo 3, okay? I have a full kind of review of all the patch notes. Someone kind of did a little bit of a synopsis on all this. And look at this. When Diablo 3 was released, the max level was 60 and Paragons didn't even exist. Paragon levels did not exist at this time. How crazy would that be? At the same time, they didn't add a ton of legendary items. They didn't even have the real money auction house when it was released. They didn't have seasons. Seasons didn't come until, where was it? I noticed that it was a long time. 2014, August of 2014, they had the new season game modes, new zones. Greater Rifts were added in 2014. Greater Rifts didn't even exist in 2012 when the game came out. It took a full 2 years to add the whole game mode that we play today. We don't even engage in the campaign. That entire area of the game is completely obsolete unless you enjoy the storyline. And the adventure mode didn't release until far, far later on. You could see here, the adventure mode came out in the Reaper of Souls expansion, and then Seasons came out shortly after with the Greater Rift, people were playing the campaign. That was it. So the replayability as well as the end game potential for some of these games did not exist. And I can't state that enough. Diablo 4 will be released with Seasons. It will be released with end game content already noted and stated in the game. These things didn't exist when Diablo 3 or Path of Exile released. And I think it's an important thing to note that, again, going back to this idea that this game is trash on release, obviously you're fair to have that opinion. And I do think there's some validity to comparing it to the games right now because that is the competition. But at the same time, I think people aren't even giving Diablo 4 a chance at all because at its launch, it is going to be the best ARPG released compared to some of these other games, which didn't even have any content in the game. And I want to pull up some of the beta reviews just to give you guys some perspective on what's going on here in Diablo 4. Similar to Diablo 4, in Path of Exile and Diablo 3 both had the opposite spectrums oftentimes for each of these games. For example, starting off with Path of Exile, these reviews are back in like 2012, so it's like 10 years ago. And so it's kind of hard to find some of the like standard YouTube videos that you might go to, but just going back and looking at some of these review sites, some of these comments, like for example, this one says, "You're overly excited about this game as of now." They go on to say basically how the skill tree seemingly has an infinite number of theoretical ways to build characters, and yet some of the skills and such seem to make it very, very specific. At the same time, they said it felt more like an MMO than an RPG. So even back then, people were saying that, oh, well, now they're introducing MMO elements, it's trash. It's literally the same conversation that people in Diablo 4 are having to some degree. Continuing onwards, also, some people mentioned that Path of Exile was absolutely amazing. This huge review, which I decided to read most of it, but I don't want to go over it all because it's massive, talked about how there's a lot of parts of the game that are really, really amazing and how it's innovative with the massive skill tree, something that it's doing completely different. At the same time, there are a ton of things that make it so that the beta experience was really trash, which a lot of people didn't enjoy. Same thing that's going on in Diablo 4. Again, there's nothing new here. Of course, one thing that's really, really important is just to look at a lot of the things going on with the game and taking it for what it's worth. For example, the conclusion here, they basically said it's top quality of work. One thing that they really enjoyed, as I mentioned, is that the huge ability to customize your character through the skill tree. Trading can be burdensome though. The current endgame death is the penalty is far too harsh. The game is being enhanced on a regular basis. No one ever says that anymore. It's just the game is trash on release. The endgame death penalty, this is something that's very common in these older ARPGs, as we will continue to see in some of these reviews. The game was hard, and that is something that's different nowadays. Just because people don't really have the time to invest or just want to play the game and have fun. So it's a very, very key difference in a lot of these older ARPGs. But at the end of the day, again, this review is basically saying, yeah, it's beta. There's some really, really good stuff to see, but we have to wait and see. There's a lot of things that are going to be improved, and we can't wait to see what that ends up being like. Again, a couple other Path of Exile reviews here. One key thing, the core gameplay mechanics do not introduce anything new to the genre. Players click around and move their characters, etc. Gameplay can begin to feel like a grind. After a while, repeating the same procedurally generated dungeons over and over is necessary. Literally the exact same comments about Diablo 4. And then, of course, they talk about how Path of Exile's unique system is that the leveling and ability systems are super unique and really set Path of Exile apart. But again, this is something that can be akin to Diablo 4 when we start entering the more later game. We don't really know because these betas actually were much more in-depth than the Diablo 4 beta was. And again, if I talk about some more reviews here, one last one for Path of Exile. This one, there's a slow grind of Path of Exile. For some, it may go unnoticed. For others, it may be all they notice. As mentioned, the first and possibly second character are most guaranteed to be failures. The main 3 acts will take players some time to get through on the default difficulty. And again, in this game, a lot of people didn't appreciate how grindy the game was because it was quite difficult. And so tuning back that difficulty over the years is kind of something that just people in general have wanted to see. People seem to forget that because now we're entering the era where the game is a lot easier. It's meant to be easier. And the hardcore players or the more dedicated players are saying this game's literally for babies. Everyone's trash. The players nowadays are trash. That's not even necessarily true. It's actually the opposite. People wanted this, and that's what they're getting in Diablo 4 here. And again, this is more akin to appealing to a more wider audience, the more casual players. There is going to be a lot of depth in Diablo 4, but at the end of the day, they want to make sure they're gathering as many people as possible that can and will involve themselves in Diablo 4. Moving on to Diablo 3, I found this review quite funny. This was literally, Diablo 3 beta is bad and Blizzard should feel bad. And then they have had a decade to plan, execute, and polish a sequel to the rapturously addictive Diablo 2. That is that is like the word for word type of comments that people are reviewing Diablo 4 with to this day, saying that, wow, Diablo 3 was 10 years ago. Why is Diablo 4 trash and not good enough? They've had so much time. Or even people that are still playing Diablo 2, how can they even do something 20 years later that is not even as good as Diablo 2? This is literally the exact same thing. And one of the biggest things that this review points out is that the Diablo 3 has taken most decisions out of the player. Stats and skills are now automatically allocated. They wanted to remove the tedium, etc., etc. They talked about these different things that were basically really, really poor at the launch of the game. I did not play Diablo 3 at launch, so I can't really comment on exactly what they're talking about, but apparently a lot of the choice was removed, okay? Again, really, really negative review. People said that they hated it. But then we go on, and again, we talk about one of the biggest things is the Diablo 3 revamp of the skill system. They basically removed the entire aspect of Diablo 2, and that's actually super fun. This person really enjoyed the more casual aspect. They said they liked the ability to experiment with different builds on the fly, and liked not having potentially a ruined character because they invested in the wrong skill or put too many points into the wrong attribute. So Diablo 2 was too hard. They wanted an easier experience. They wanted a simplistic experience, and Diablo 3 kind of scratched that itch. So again, I go back to say Diablo 4 is actually answering this review in some degree, and yet disagreeing, or rather doing the opposite of what the earlier reviews might wanted, which is it's too easy, or removing some of the choice from Diablo 2 in Diablo 3, which is what they wanted. Moving on to another review here, and this is the last one for Diablo 3. The verdict of this review basically said from IGN, its merits as an action game alone, Diablo 3 shines, which is a pretty common aspect. The combat, the arcade style, just going through and killing things is always really fun. And then the hunt for more generous drop rates. They really liked the fact that there's more drop rates, which again is another controversial point. All of this to say, I mention all of this just to say that and to answer some of the commentary out there about Diablo 4. We're so polarized, which is, again, nothing new. But there are so many people saying that the game is absolute trash. These games are better. Path of Exile is better. Diablo 3 is better. And then there's some people that are saying this game is literally going to be the absolute best mega game. Nothing can ever compete with it. And I say, I tend to agree with the more positive side of things. One thing for sure, as I titled this video, it will be the best ARPG ever released, just in sheer amounts of content and the ability to play so many different things on release. Okay, again, if you compare these games on release, I don't think there's much of an argument to say that Path of Exile or Diablo 3 was even close to as good as Diablo 4. I don't think that's an argument that can be made, in my opinion, okay? However, I do think that there is some merit to compare the kind of launch version of Diablo 4 to the other available games like Diablo 2, Diablo 3, or Path of Exile. I think that's totally fair because you have to choose what you want to play and have fun with. But I want to note that there's a few things you have to consider. For one, you're not locked into any choice. There's no reason to be as polarizing as possible. But there is some things to consider. Diablo 4 will be getting much, much better. There are so many options to improve the game. These other games like Diablo 3 and Path of Exile, yes, they continuously do updates. Well, Diablo 3 may not be anymore, but Path of Exile is continuously doing updates until Path of Exile 2 releases. But the amount of potential that Diablo 4 has is far above any other ARPG out there, just because of the newer technical side of things. And I think that's what we can expect in this newer release, okay? At the same time, you have to consider that this game won't be perfect on release. For those people that are saying that there's nothing wrong with it, and I don't understand all the complaining, I do think there are some valid criticisms to be had. But the important thing is that we don't go pushed into the massive negativity part of the criticisms where it's just absolutely thrashing on a game, and actually use those criticisms to improve the game over time, because at the end of the day, bar none, this game has the most potential to improve on all these systems that we potentially want to, and who knows if they'll do it, but I know that they have the option to do it, and that's what I'm most excited about as well. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I thought this was kind of an interesting dive into the depths of the launch of both Path of Exile and Diablo 3. It kind of shocked me because I didn't play Diablo 3 on launch, but I couldn't imagine Diablo 3 without Paragon levels, and I also couldn't imagine Path of Exile without the standard mapping procedures. But, you know, it is what it is, and it's just surprising to see and compare these two, or rather 3 games on release. And it's kind of shocking to see how far those games have come, and I hope to see Diablo 4 do the same. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.